their group of friends, and then there's a straight group of friends. And the group of friends that started smoking pot had a lot of bad eggs. And they were horrible to him. And they would come over to say, you know, we're sorry he's sick, we'll take him swimming or we'll take him somewhere. And I said, just no liquor and no pot. You know, that's very kind of you. But he would come home so stoned, they would give him all the things I'd asked him not to. And I really could not keep them away. And it was the bad group of kids, and they were just, I couldn't handle it. And so Dr. Harding, there used to be a hospital in Columbus called Harding Hospital, suggested they had 3 little small hospitals that were 26 bed, and they were Seventh-day Adventists, and they did a lot of
holistic?
What?
Holistic or alternative?
They were holistic. Thank you. And they did a lot. I remember one child came in to have his they wanted to amputate his leg at a hospital in town, and they gave him charcoal, beds of charcoal, and they saved his leg. I mean, and it was for hot showers, cold showers. They did a lot of things the natural way. And we went down to, I had to get away from the kids. And Harding Hospital was too close to the kids. And so he said, take him down to Wildwood, Georgia, this little tiny missionary hospital. Wonderful people there, wonderful kids. And it was Seventh-day Adventist. And he did so well because there was no cigarette smoking and no sugar, and they led a very rigid diet. And I thought, you know, I found where I want to be. And I asked them if I could buy a trailer and live on their land. They all lived in trailers, except for the hospital. And they said I could, so we stayed about a year and a half. And I got to see, for the very first time, what schizophrenia is really like. Because everything that was, the kids weren't there teasing him. They were wonderful Christian young people there. He would, you know, the sleeping came back, but I got to see the illness, and I was no longer angry at him for smoking pot, because there was nothing like that, and no drinking, and I was not allowed to live on their grounds because I'm not an Adventist. So they had a field about a mile away, but they owned the land, and so I bought a trailer, and we set up house for a couple of years in this trailer. And the Christian kids would come down, and they'd go and they'd chop wood or they'd plant corn. And we lived really like that for about a year and a half. And I was very frightened. I was alone in this field. I was in a tri-state area. Cars would come in at night and shine their lights on us. There were no cell phones in those days. My telephone ran outside of my trailer. And I slept with like a hammer on the couch because I was frightened. I wanted to get a gun, and my family wouldn't let me because we could have been taken so easily. And all of a sudden, I used to pray at night. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere came this beautiful German Shepherd. And he came up to me, and he didn't have a collar on. And so I thought, wow. And so I started feeding him. And he became this incredible, answer to a prayer. And he and Kurt became so close. I mean, and he would sleep under our trailer. And I had a doghouse built for him, and he wouldn't even go in it. But anyway, when the cars would drive in with their lights, you would see them, you would hear, we called him Bear. Bear would hit the trailer, jump up, hit the trailer, start barking, and the cars would just turn their lights around and run for the hills. And
That's my favorite chapter.
I was never,
Chapter 5.
It was.
So cute.
I was never scared again. And when we left, and we did leave after a couple of years, because he was still very sick. and I knew it was the illness. Bear followed us, and I tried to have somebody else start feeding him when I knew we were going to go. But he followed us to the freeway, and I just sobbed. And many years later, 2 or 3 years later, I was awakened one morning, and out on my front lawn was a German Shepherd. And it was like the sun spotlighted him. And I was going to wake Kirk and say, you know, I swear this is Bear. But how could that be? We were in Georgia, and here we were in Columbus. But to this day, I've never seen the dog before, and I've never seen him since. And he was curled up asleep in my front yard. And I have very deep feelings about things like that. But anyway, he was our protector. So that was Wildwood. Then from Wildwood, we went to shock treatments. We did all of this. My son was not getting better. And there was no medicine that seemed to help him. And the shock treatments, he was covered in urine. After he had 9 of them. And I just died every time I saw him afterward. He was soaking wet, white as a sheet. And I think the shock treatments may have helped the voices for a little bit, the hallucinations. I came to learn, speaking of hallucinations, I came to learn that when we would go to dinner, Kirk had hallucinations, heard voices, which, by the way, I brought. He told me the voices say, you are lazy, you don't even have a job, you don't work hard, you tell lies, you told lies in the past, you're a wimp, you're weak, you are weak-willed, people will beat you up, people are stronger than you are, you can't take it, you're a quitter. So these are the voices that Kirk always heard. He could control these voices, he could control them until, you guys, this is true, until he had a cup of coffee. And caffeine just threw him, he had no control. And we would be out for dinner, and if he had a cup of coffee after dinner, he would talk to the voices next to him. And they immediately, I began saying this at my meetings, like we're meeting, and I said, I swear it's the caffeine. And then somebody at one of the meetings said, Diann, there's a new book written on what caffeine does to people who have schizophrenia. And I said, you know, I really want to meet the doctor, and I did. And he was a schizophrenic specialist, and there were maybe 5 in the country at that time. And I flew over to meet him, and we became really good friends. I brought him to speak to different cities in Florida and different cities in Ohio. And
What's his name?
Pardon me?
What's his name?
Dr. Alexander Hyde, and he's wonderful. And I said, you know, you gave me some validity. I can talk to the other doctors and say that I'm not just the only one. And I said to Dr. Hyde, how do you know it's caffeine? And he said, because I see the same patient twice a day. I see them in the morning and they're higher than a kite, and I see them in the afternoon and they're stabilized. So he said, I don't have any qualms about telling people that. I want to read you too, he said in his book, the most vital taboo in the treatment of schizophrenia, but least known, is caffeine. And that's enormous. To me, that was enormous. In those days, every hospital, mental hospital, had caffeine. And Menninger's, I said, he shouldn't have the caffeine. And they said, Diann, that's his choice. Caffeine is a way of life for some people. And I said, why don't you just set up a bar? Because he's an addict. It really changes him like alcohol does for people. And they just ignored me. And I didn't, have what I needed, the backing at that time. But Kirk said to me, and I think it's important that you know, it's not just him, but he said, my most important message to patients of schizophrenia was that the only thing that didn't have caffeine in it 40 years ago was Nescafe. Nothing else was decaffeinated. Professionals did not believe me, not one of them, until I showed them Dr. Hyde's book. My son had a true addiction. Kirk told me in the car one day when we were driving to a baseball game, Mom, I am in a lot of pain. When I drink caffeine, I don't have to face it. I'm not sure the pain is worth the facing. I blew my life. I can't believe what has happened to me. When I'm high on caffeine, I like the voices. They are my friends. When I am not high, I don't want the voices. They bother me. Do you know, Mother, how sick I was? I was responding to the voices publicly. People must have thought I was crazy. Mom, I know I am doing that, but I just don't care. I'm too far gone in the point of the illness. Kurt gave up caffeine on Good Friday at the end of March in 1990. This allowed medicine, the new medicine, which was called Clozaril, of which he was, it was, what is it, Karen? Anyway, he was in the beginning of it.
Trial program.
Yeah. A what?
The clinical trial
Yeah,
program.
thank you. Clinical trial program. And it allowed the medicine to kick in at this one hospital. And when he gave up the caffeine, and oh, you guys, when he first went, they had caffeine. And when I got it, I showed the professionals of the hospital, and they agreed to take it out of the hospital. It was voted on by the board, and they took it out of the hospital. And then the kids were furious, and so they would try to steal it. And they had brown noses, and they would get instant coffee and snort the caffeine crystals.
Who doesn't do that?
What?
Who doesn't do that?
Really? Oh. Anyway.
No, I never heard of that.
There were a lot, there were a lot of kids that were just all the time on caffeine. But I did get it out of the hospital, and the director, who was at the head of it, lost his job. People were not happy. The kids were not happy. The parents would bring in coffee to their kids, so it was very hard. Anyway, when there was well, my son became physically ill, and he would freeze halfway across the room. He would do a freeze. His tongue would thrust in and out. It was becoming difficult for him to eat because of the old medicine. And so that's when I heard about Clozaril. And they were doing a trial experimentation in a hospital not far from where we were in Florida. And he became the first of the clinical trial. And it did not work while the caffeine was in the hospital, but once it quit, and they really got rid of it, the medicine kicked in. And it really has been uphill for us ever since. And he's had 2 relapses. I brought him home in the year 2000. He's had 2 relapses, but not bad, and they both had to do with caffeine, and not bad enough that I had to hospitalize him. But Karen had been ill last month and moved in with us and brought her coffee, and I said, hide it. And but anyway, he said, Mom, caffeine is everywhere. If I want it, I can get it. She doesn't have to hide it. But my son is doing well. He's 60 years old. The first 20 years were the hard ones for us, and that's when I went all over the country. By the way, one of the things I almost did was the gentleman that invented Gatorade at the University of Florida was chief of nephrology, and he gave all of his money from Gatorade to the study of schizophrenia. He was chief of nephrology, and he realized when he would put the schizophrenic patients on dialysis, there was a substance left in their blood, and that no one else had, just the schizophrenics. And they dubbed it an endorphin. And they started doing research on it, and they did it to many people in select cities, and they had 13 out of 30 lost their voices, lost their hallucinations completely. And they had a few suicides. I mean, it was a gamble. But when we went up to see this doctor, before I knew about Clozaril, we went up to see this doctor, and he said, that one of his patients had written a book called Welcome Silence, and she had 2 dialysis and never had voices again and became a psychiatrist, but she doesn't practice it with her patients, which surprised me. But anyway, dialysis is still in question, and I understand they're doing some research on Stanford University, but Karen and I really researched it. I don't know if they're still doing it or not, but I tried to include some of the information in my book, but the doctor that was responsible for this had died, and they're building a memorial for him at the University of Florida. So I don't have any statistics. Everything he had is, in boxes and stored away. But the doctor back home heard about me doing this, taking my son up, and we were all ready to go. And he said, Diann, in your zeal to get your son well, you're overstepping your bounds. It's very, very dangerous to do what you're wanting to do. And he said, please, I'm begging you not to do this. And then he told me about Clozaril. So I kind of lost you in the story, but anyway, my son started on Clozaril and had a wonderful psychiatrist in Columbus, Ohio, who gave him psychological testing on what he would be the best at to have a job. And his interests were, he scored very high in law, but he was too old to go to law school, and the pressures of law school he didn't know if he could handle. So he suggested paralegal. And my son went to Columbus State and got a straight A paralegal. He got a Dartmouth degree too. Went back after 30 years and got a Dartmouth degree. Then got his paralegal a degree from Columbus State, and has been working for a year and a half with Disability Rights of Ohio as as a paralegal, kind of. And anyway, he has a job that he goes to every single morning. He leaves about 7:30 and he's home about 6:30, and he works out down the basement. He lives with me, and he exercises for an hour and a half religiously every day, and he's a joy to live with. The tables have turned, and he's the one that pounds down the floor in the morning. So he takes care of me. I don't take care of him anymore. And life really has become a joy. And Karen and I are here really to advocate for the recovery of these kids with mental illness, and for you caregivers. That's what our life is all about. Hopefully, some things that I told you may not make any sense to you, but I tried desperately, and I was going to help him or die. I could not let him. I couldn't tough love it. I couldn't let him go. And whatever I gave to him has come back to us 100 times. He is really socially, I'm his best friend, and Karen. So there's a void there socially. He goes to all the football games, all the hockey games. I see it,
Improving. He's gaining with his job the last couple of years. I see the self-confidence returning in some of the